This is Ray Billings, a builder and driver of Tombstone from BattleBots, and today you are listening to the RoboCast.
Hello everyone, my name is Samuel64 and welcome back to the RoboCast with myself, Steve the American Killjoy, and World of Woodrow. And of course, as you all have known already by the intro, a man who... I need to find out how you described yourself in the question you asked on Facebook for yourself. Let me find it. A man who described himself as so successful, incredibly good looking, and incredibly humble. It is Ray Billings from Tombstone.
Every one of those things. That is
it's true.
Me.
It's
Absolutely.
True. I think the first thing we have to ask is how are you? Because for those that don't know, you're not participating in the upcoming season of BattleBots. So tell us the story. What's going on?
So it was not quite a year ago. I injured my left hand relatively severely. I cut my hand on a table saw. So I made the mistake of wearing a pair of gloves when I shouldn't have been wearing a pair of gloves. The saw caught the tail of the glove and pulled my hand into the saw. So most of the damage was just to soft tissue. You stitch it up, it's no big deal. But on the left index finger, the cut went down to the bone, cut through the tendons, cut through the blood vessels, cut through the nerves. And I've had to have multiple surgeries on that finger to try to get back to having a hand that works like normal. And I was going to try to be at BattleBots. They were originally supposed to film August or September. And I was pushing my surgery out, this latest one, to October. And I would have been able to come, I would have been able to compete. I just would have had a finger that didn't work like it was supposed to. Unfortunately, and this was out of BattleBots' control. It's not like they did this. It was just things just sort of pushed, and it pushed out to the point where it wasn't going to. The schedules just weren't going to line up. So I've had that surgery that finally reattached a tendon to that finger for the first time in a year. I can wiggle that finger. So I mean, from a health perspective, things are going well. It's progressing well. The downside is, it's likely to be re-injured right now if I did any sort of work with it. And the simple truth is it's not worth the risk to try to come support BattleBots this year. I need to spend this time to get healthy. I mean,
completely understandable.
Yeah, let's face it, ultimately everyone's health and well-being, especially in recent years, has become, a lot more, in the spotlight. And I think, we three and everyone in the community as a whole wish you the speediest of recoveries. So hopefully we can see you again very, very soon in the arena, because it won't be the same.
And the fan and feedback I've got has universally been that everybody's like, hey, I hope you get better. I mean, we do have the best fans in the world. We really do. Absolutely. And my intention is still to go to the event. So I'll get the social aspects. I'll get to go hang out with my friends and the other builders and whatnot. I just won't have to be working my butt off like everybody else is.
See, so, you're doing it right.
It'll be okay. I'll be all right.
That's excellent news. Well, our normal format would be to review an episode. Obviously, we haven't got an episode to review because we've done them all. We've done
no fantasy BattleBots here.
No, nope. Not at all. So what we did briefly arrange possibly to have you on for the final of BattleBots Champions, which obviously didn't work out. It clashed with literally your surgery was that week, so we couldn't speak to you. So instead, we kind of devised, let's do a full through the years interview style, which we did kind of similar with Donald from Lockjaw last year. And we've got a list of questions. Hopefully, it won't take too long, and hopefully, it won't take up everyone's day. But there's a lot to get through. There is a lot to get through.
We got a lot of questions, and we got a lot of really good stuff that we can work through.
We do. Yeah. So I'm going to hand over.
Thank you, everyone, by the way.
Yes, thank you, everyone, for everyone's input. But Steve, I'm going to hand over to you for what I've called the early years.
Okay. So we have the early years, like even going pre-BattleBots. So Ray, anywhere you'd like to start on this particular question, were you particularly like creative, mechanically minded growing up? And if not, like what led you down the STEM path?
Sure. Okay. So when I was growing up, I was a kid. My his passion, his hobby was go-kart racing. Right. So I spent a lot of time at 4, 5, 6 years old working on go-karts with my dad in the garage. So some measure of mechanical work started really early for me because he just included me with going to these events and doing this. And so, I was always mechanically inclined because I started as soon as my hand could close around wrenches, I was doing some of this stuff. As I got a little older, we got more into dirt bike racing. So as a, preteen or early teen years, I did a lot of dirt bike riding. So again, you're always working on them all the time. A lot of mechanical work there. From there, when I got old enough to start driving, then obviously then you start moving up into cars, right? And I really found kind of sort of a gift there at that point in time because I was really good at this. And so, we'd pull a big block Chevy out of something and put it in something else just because it'd be a cool project. And I did a lot of that through my high school years. I was just always had my car or somebody's car disassembled in the driveway. My mom was a saint, by the way. I mean, because I had a tree that leaned over the driveway that I'd use a little winch out of that tree to be pulling engines out of a car. And she never batted an eye. I had cars disassembled in the driveway all the time, and she was very supportive.
So there's a whole different universe where we have Ray Billings, the stock car driver, possibly.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, all of that, I spent a lot of time at the drag strip running cars and whatnot. So, I mean, I had a lot of fun through those years. Cool. The mechanical part of that eventually moved into, for a while, I had a job working for a company that dug water wells. So I worked on everything from tiny little, Honda engines all the way up to V12 Detroit diesels. And so I had a lot of fabricating and mechanical skills a long time before anybody even thought about anything robotic at this point. Mm-hmm. So that's probably where most of those fabrication skills, mechanical skills came from, is all that early stuff playing around with, go-karts, dirt bikes, cars, whatever,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So kind of just bouncing off of what we already covered here. So is anything in particular, I mean, the question asks if there's anything in particular that in your career path that had transferable skills, but from what you've been telling me, everything that you've done, leading up to this really does transfer. Having that hands-on experience with taking apart a car and just being as young as you were and being able to work with tools that young is really, really huge. So I guess I can bounce off this question and say if there's anything particularly interesting that you worked on that you're particularly fond of pre-BattleBots, like any particular project that you had anything
all of any projects I had them were interesting. I wouldn't have done them otherwise, I rebuilt a bunch of different cars. It was kind of interesting. So it was just all kinds of fun. I had a real good time doing all back when I had more energy than I've got now. So every once in a while I get that little urge. It's like I'll see a car listed for sale, and it's like, well, that would be fun. I can rebuild that, and then it's like, I don't know if I got the energy to do that anymore. That just seems like too much work now.
That's when you get your boy to join in for the fun, extra pair of hands.
Yeah. Well, and Justin's real good at helping. He's good at diving in and whatnot, but that sort of stuff, diving in and working on a car, is definitely not his interest. He's good mechanically, but the passion to dive into it and tear a car apart, it's not there. He'd rather they just run and he just drive them,
I'm completely on board with that. All right, so I guess the next thing I want to ask you is we're going to get into the combat robot stage. So what was your first real exposure to the sport? Were you a fan previously before you started building, or what was the introduction like for you?
Okay. So of the various many careers that I've had, at one point in time, I actually taught computer networking in an adult college. Right. And my boss, who was the department head, was a big fan of the original series of BattleBots on Comedy Central. And so he would tape the shows on VHS tapes, and he would bring them into work, and we would watch them between classes and whatnot. And he had an extensive electronics background, and obviously I had extensive, fabrication and mechanical background. And so between the two of us, we sort of started spitballing some ideas, and we figured out we could do this. Unfortunately for him, not long after that, life took him in a different direction. He got a job at a different school. He left, but that's where the bug started for me. And from there, it just turned into sort of a father and son project between me and Justin.
Mm-hmm. So yes, that's totally what drew you into building. Did you find it difficult starting out? Because I know here's the thing, nowadays it's like, oh, you can buy anything online, any electronics, speed controllers, all these things. Did you find it difficult getting into the sport at first, even though you have a very strong mechanical electronics background with cars? Did you find it difficult to transfer that to combat robots?
I mean, as well as that, like, you can just look up guides and things online as well.
Yeah,
like, this just didn't
nowadays
exist like back in the Comedy Central days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a lot less of that public information available. Like, you go back to those days, a lot of the builders, they communicated with each other through a forum on Delphi. Okay, that was the main communication between a lot of the builders. And I didn't even know that existed when I showed up to it wasn't until I got to the first event when I realized that there was more of an engaged community to talk with about this. So yeah, that first build was just completely on me, all on my own. I didn't have really any other support to make that happen. And was it difficult? Yeah. I mean, it was challenging, but I mean, that was part of the fun for me, was to try to figure out all of that stuff. And, I look back at some of the early stuff that we made, and almost comically amateurish, the stuff that I built then. But those first two seasons at BattleBots, I went 3-1 both of those seasons. So it's even back then, I still was able to, win some matches and have a good time. And so it was good. We had a lot of fun with it. It was a good time.
Mm-hmm. So now that we're in BattleBots, what can you tell us about? I guess we could already say what drew you in permanently, because it's like once you're there, you kind of have this tight knit community where it's like, yeah, I think I'm kind of stuck with these guys. Yeah. So is there anything that you can tell us about your experiences with your first robot being Darkness? And I guess we can also lead that into what you brought next, which would be the Raven. Is there anything right. that any interesting stories, any interesting fight tidbits that you remember?
Well, it's funny because at this stage we've had like 1,500 matches, something like that. In large classes. So I always love this one because kids are great for this, because they'll come up and they'll say, do you remember when you fought this robot in 2003? And I go, sure. And they go, well, you know what? At 35 seconds in, you turned right instead of left. Why'd you do that? And it's like, I don't
This was years ago. Leave me alone.
Right, exactly. So, the first two builds for Darkness and Raven were certainly interesting. So we built Darkness in that first year, had a good time, won some matches and whatnot. So when we came back the following year, that's when I went ahead and built the Raven. So Justin would have something to buy. So we both have, I had the middleweight, he had the lightweight. Mm-hmm. And they were middle of the pack type robots. There was no chance either one of them could possibly go the distance and win the event. But, it was a way for us to get involved in all of this. And yes, it's addictive. I mean, once you're in and you're building it, it's not like you're ever going to say, that was fun, I'm going to drop that and go do stamp collecting or something. I mean, once it's in your blood, you're just going to keep building and keep doing better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's really, you can actually see especially in Darkness, the DNA that would later end up in Last Rites and Tombstone. I mean, that body shape is just very iconic. And it's it's nice to see that you stuck around long enough for us to really have a really nice history there, because there was one more robot. I don't know if we're going to get into it into the next section here, where we start talking about the dark age of BattleBots, where the kind of things kind of just disappeared off of TV. And I think I'll leave that to Sam to kind of fill in the gaps there.
Sure. Well, there's certainly lots to cut through, because I mean, I was doing some research earlier today before we started recording, and just we'll get to it a bit later on. Mm-hmm. So obviously we've briefly touched on Darkness and the Raven, very similar kind of body shapes, if you like, to what sure. would eventually come. And obviously these are your first two builds. You're not going to try anything too outlandish straight away.
Yeah.
What led you down the kinetic energy path? Because obviously it's not too long after BattleBots finishes when Tombstone, the super heavyweight, and Last Right start to appear. Right. What led you down that path initially?
This huge jump from Thwackbots to let's to put big a spinny thing.
Right. Yeah. All right. So the actual first kinetic energy robot I built was called Shin Splitter. So it was a heavyweight that was similar in design to Last Right's Tombstone. And the thing was, I could see where the sport was going. Certainly, an idea of a Thwackbot just was not going to be competitive anymore. That was just the simple truth of it. And so then what do I build? And it's not like you were gonna. It's not like I haven't made wedges, but that just didn't seem that interesting to me. I wanted a robot that did something more than just drive around. And so, the original thought for this, because I remember watching Mo on BattleBots, right? And I was thinking, I like the way it was shaped, but to me, it looked like he devoted too much weight to the drivetrain. If you're going to be a weapon, you need to actually make the weapon
be a weapon.
Yeah. And so the original thought, before I cut one piece of steel and before I actually machined any pieces whatsoever, was the weapon had to be scary enough to beat anybody in the class. And that was the original build for Shin Splitter. And then as the other robots throughout the years, Mortician, Last Rights, Tombstone, all of those, as I built those, every time that was the thought, is I need to have enough energy in this weapon to win any match. Okay. I'm not saying I'm going to win every match. Nobody can think that, but there has to be enough energy to win any match against any opponent. And so that's just where the build philosophy's been ever since.
So was it Mike Tyson who said everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth? I think it was. Yeah. That is, the fighting robot equivalent of Mike Tyson, definitely. What was it? Just live event experience in general that kind of pushed you down that way? Because obviously you'd fought a few times already at BattleBots. The show ends. Other different competitions appear. Was it seeing the competition developing that way as well, or was it just the nature of you kind of foresaw, okay, this has got a limited shelf life, I've got to do something different?
Yeah, okay. And so I had these thoughts. I'm trying to run through all the different ideas, and I'm thinking flippers, full shell spinners. I'm thinking all kinds of different things of the ways I was going to move forward and be more competitive. And there's a surplus metal place not too far from me that I used to buy parts from all the time. And I literally walked in there and they had a piece of aluminum cut about the size of the weapon bars that I've run ever since, right? And it was just happenstance. I walk in and it's sitting there and it's like, well, if I put some big teeth on that, that'd be a pretty good weapon bar. And it really just happened. The first build was just, I walked into a piece that would actually work perfect as a weapon bar and bought it and brought it home and machined it. And once I saw some success with that, then it's like, okay, we need to keep developing this and getting better with this.
So we have to blame whoever put that on the shelf at that metal shop for
some guy.
years of Tombstone.
That would be true. Yeah, if that hadn't been there, I don't know. I may have actually built a full shell instead. So I could have been.
You did have a full shell once upon a time. You acquired.
At one point we had one. Yeah. Although that, to be honest, that was one that we got from RDC. We got that from the Megabyte guys, and that they had sort of just stopped developing on the lightweight, and it's like, you know what, we'll take that.
I'll take that. Thank you very much.
Yeah. If you don't want to do anything with that anymore, I'll give it a shot. So
that's good. Now, I feel like we have to come to RoboGames eventually because well, not just RoboGames, obviously, just the live scene in America during that kind of mid to late 2000s, early 2010s period. Last Rites was just like, it was the consistency that like I was going through. I knew of Last Rites like before Tombstone came along and BattleBots and did what it did. I didn't realize just how like there's the three of you. There's Original Sin, there's Sewer Snake, and there's Last Rites every year for about 8 years. It's unbelievable.
We were known as the Big Three.
Big Three, yeah, and like I mean, was it frustrating for you? As you seem like a competitive person. Just just a bit,
Just a tad.
Was it frustrating not like second, basically was it 3 years in a row and top three for every year for 8 years? How frustrating was it for you to just never get the win in RoboGames?
Yes, and it's funny because so the guy that ran RoboGames and Combox Cup, it was the same event organizer, Dave, right? And so I never won the heavyweight category at RoboGames. Okay, now I won it twice at Combox, so I did have some success with this.
Yeah,
but you're right, it was always a bridesmaid, never a bride feeling for me because I came in second or third every year. And it actually says a lot about just the tenacity and build quality of the three of us that we continue to just always stay right there.
It was every year. Like I was going through like the listings.
It's remarkable.
It's just the three of you every year for like 8 years. It's like okay, maybe Megabyte turns up every now and then, and things like that. But
who's Megabyte?
It's ridiculous.
It was a long period of dominance, absolutely, and you can still see that now. I mean, if Matt's driving with Cobalt, I mean, he's fantastic, and Gary hasn't had the same success with free shipping, but it's an exciting match anytime he fights. I mean, you can see what he's doing there. So I mean, it's all those skills that we picked up in those in between years. We're still using those now to put on a great match, great show every time we fight.
Well, I was going to say, obviously, we mentioned Last Rites. Look, like Tombstone, it looks like a very simple robot. It's a weapon on wheels to the nth degree. But I don't know if you know the answer to this. I dare say you probably don't want to know the answer to this. But like, how many hours of just R&D, fettling, design work went into both robots? Like, because the DNA is obviously very similar. Like, I dread to ask how many hours, days, weeks, months, years went into these robots.
And the thing is, when it goes beyond a hobby into an obsession, into a passion, right? You kind of ever don't stop. So it's one of those things where I'll be making breakfast and I'll suddenly have an idea of how I'm going to redesign something in the robot, how the electronics are mounted, or how I'm going to lay out the frame or whatever. And I've got notepads around the house that I can essentially write them while I'm thinking about it. I can sort of sketch or notate what I'm doing.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect you to draw it out in your pancakes,
Well, I'm using ketchup on the counter, drawing it.
Right. Right. This breakfast looks awfully familiar.
So the reality is once it is no longer just something I do, but something that sort of defines your life. Right? At that point, you kind of don't ever stop this development process. which, you know, I'm retired now, but when I still worked, it was, you know, I'm sure I annoyed the crap out of people because we'd be busy working on something, and all of a sudden it's like, you know, I got an idea, and I'd start just verbalizing whatever I was thinking about the robot, and my coworkers, you could just see their eyes roll back in their heads like, shut up, they don't care.
Imagine being the new guy just turning up and being like, what the hell is he on about? You know?
What have I got myself into?
Well, you know, I'm not a really big man, but I can be very intense. And so it's one of those things where you could see guys to be like backing away from me. It's like, stop talking.
Obviously, Last Rites isn't the only robot you've had, you know, success with over the years. And like I'd say the other robots of note would probably be things like Mortician you mentioned, you know, the middleweight.
Right.
Which I believe you actually have signed up for RoboGames next year, which is crazy.
So Mortician hasn't seen the inside of the arena in a long time. And so I was actually looking through what's out in the garage, and I don't really have anything parts wise for it that I think are worthy of continuing to use now. So it'll look very similar. It'll be same sort of, you know, pedigree, but every piece of it's going to be brand new. It's just going to have to be a from the ground up build.
Mm-hmm. It's exciting. The other two robots I think kind of related, but if not, you know, exactly the same, are Great Pumpkin and Swamp Thing. Now. Yeah. Why? And the level of disparity between these two robots and Tombstone are just like, they're worlds apart. Like, you know, Tombstone is this, you know, this killing machine, looks, you know, angular and dangerous, and then you've got an inflatable pumpkin on a wedge. Like, what?
All right. Talk us through it. So the original build for Great Pumpkin as a heavyweight, okay. Dave, the guy who runs RoboGames, Combat's Cup, if he was running those two events close to each other, sometimes he didn't get all that many robots registered for the heavier categories because it's an expensive sport. Okay. Mm-hmm. People would have to decide, I'm going to one or the other rather than both of them. And he had a Combat's Cup event where he didn't have very many heavyweights registered, and he was. People come to see the heavyweights fight. That's how you get people to come to your show, to pay to sit in the audience. They don't come to watch the antweights fight. They don't come to watch the little ones fight. They come to watch the heavier robots fight. And so he was upset that he didn't think he was going to get enough robots to put on a good show, which is the primary goal of a show promoter, is to put on a good show. So the first build for Great Pumpkin was just leftover junk that was sitting in my garage that I welded together real quick so he'd have an extra heavyweight at his event. So the start of the frame, where the drive motors and the batteries and all that,
looks very familiar, doesn't it?
Was an older, damaged Mortician frame. Okay, that's what it was. It was a Mortician frame that I was going to throw away. So I cut off the nose where the weapon would have been, and I just welded on a big, huge steel plow, put the pumpkin up on top, ta-da, you've got a heavyweight. And it's funny because in its first event, when it first competed, I think it was like 130 pounds in a 220-pound category. So it was just barely over a middleweight weight. It went there with the whole idea of it was just going to go there and get its butt kicked. That's the only reason I built it. And sadly, we actually won quite a few matches with it. It wasn't meant to be competitive at all. It was meant to just go there and, you know, put on a good show and get killed, right? And that same basic robot got updated and built a few different times, and then it moved from being called Great Pumpkin to being called Swamp Thing. It was always just the same robot. It was just the same. It still had the same busted Mortician frame in the back. We rebuilt some of the wedge pieces on the front, but it was just a leftover junk. That's all it was. All of it was just leftover parts.
You know, it was actually a reserve for, but and I was going through your website earlier. I was trawling through your website earlier just to, you know, try to find as much info as I could. And Swamp Thing fought the very first fight in the new BattleBots.
Yeah. Yep. The unaired kind of test fight So similar to like what they did with Robot Wars, where we just didn't see that fight, but it happened, test the arena and, see.
They needed something for the camera guys to sort of practice on. So that they had us and
it was Chronic.
Yeah. And so they had us kind of circle the arena this way and then circle the arena this way, chasing each other, but no contact, right? And sort of driving around and zipping around a bit. And so the camera guys could get used to panning and they could take some photos and whatnot. And then when they were done, they'd done their bit. They go, okay, we've had our bit. You guys want to, fight in here? And everybody's like, yeah. Obviously we want to, right? And so it was the very first match, and the new part of all of this was.
And you won. You won the first fight by judges'
and we won. Well, the thing was, it was fairly even. We'd get under them, they'd get under us, back and forth and whatnot. And the arena, because it's brand new and it's got brand new paint, okay, it had an incredible amount of traction, and much more than those guys were used to dealing with. And they broke something in their drivetrain because it was, they're used to wheels spinning and whatnot, and something. It was a little more stress than they were used to putting on it.
Bits of the wooden floor in the UK
I was going to say,
coming out from underneath them every now and again.
Let me tell you, the live event arenas at the time in the UK were, well, one still has wood now, but like the grip level is not the same, I imagine, at all.
Well, and it deteriorates as the event wears on. You start to, the robots are essentially sanding all that grit paint down. So by the end of the event, it gets slicker. But when it was brand new like that, there was no slip whatsoever. And so if they'd gone for a whole long period of time, they probably would have beaten us. They were getting under us more than we were them, but they just broke something in the drive.
And that's the funny thing too. Did you know that you were going to be fighting? You were actually fighting against what the DNA that would go into a future champion in the UK.
Wars, I was going to say.
Well, and
what Robot Wars?
Yeah, we at the time it's just guys goofing off and having a good time. So
it's all part of it. I think the other, obviously, robot we have to talk about ultimately is Tombstone. The super heavyweights, which eventually lends its name to what we have today. Really, again doing well at RoboGames. Of course, runner up, because why break tradition?
Right.
And I mean, obviously the super heavyweight division went away eventually, and there was a name floating around which needed to be assigned to something. Which
that's kind of how that went. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. So
instead of going a whole different route with a different name.
All right. At the time when I built Tombstone and ran it as a super heavyweight, we did really well with it. And in fact, the last time you can call it an official BattleBots event at a super heavyweight, we won. Okay, that was the NPC charity event. Okay.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Tombstone's the only robot that's won BattleBots champions in two separate weight categories. We won that event. They had a few different events then, and then that's when Dave started the Combots Cup event, and that was going to be an event that had a cash prize. And so I remember him and I talking at the time, and he's like, I'm trying to decide whether I'm going to go with heavy or super heavyweight. And I go, okay, well, you need to pick one, and then that's where my development's going to go. And so he decided that he was going to run heavyweights for the Combots Cup, and that was sort of the killer for the super heavyweight category, because everybody like me stopped development on supers and started building heavies, because that's where the competition was going to be. And so that's when Last Rites
all Ziggy's fault.
but this, for the current builders at the time, that was a big hunk of the talent pool just moved from one weight category to another. So that was when the original build for Last Rites was done. And I just basically stopped any development with Tombstone from that point on. So we go forward a few years to when BattleBots, they had an event that they were gonna film, and it never made it to TV.
There's like one episode. I think the CBS Sports Network was going to do something with it.
It was CBS, and there were pieces, because they did a college part and a pro part, and some of the college stuff floated to the surface. The pro part never did. There's never been any footage of that. Right?
That's a shame.
And that was 2008, 2009, somewhere in there. All right. And so they wanted me to be there. but I wasn't going to take last rights to there, because if I did, you're essentially giving up your rights to the robot, because they want to own the name and the likeness and all the rest of this stuff, so they can market it for toys and everything that they do. So I had to come up with a robot. I knew the style of robot I wanted to build. I couldn't take last rights. Okay. So I still had the name Tombstone. It's the name that was mine. And as far as the combat world goes, it's my robot. Mm-hmm. So I built a new version of last rights. So there's a lot of interchange parts, because that was 220. Mm-hmm. And I took it as Tombstone. And so that obviously that show never made it to TV, lots of fun. Hey, whatever, that went away. Years later, when BattleBots came back, I just continued forward with the Tombstone name. And so that's what I've been using ever since.
Mm-hmm. I really do wonder if ever Greg and Trey wanted to do
footage.
Like a special run DVD.
They've got it all. They've got all the footage.
Even if it's unedited.
They've got a YouTube channel now with 1 million subscribers. There's no reason why they can't just release it and people will watch it.
I would love to see some of that, because there were some outstanding matches. So, my favorite at the time, because Megabyte was there, and I actually punched through their titanium shell. I got him. And it was a fantastic match, and I've never seen the footage. It's would mean a lot.
Locked up here.
Yeah.
Well, that's a really nice segue. We kind of brought it back to BattleBots, back to Tombstone. Jevon, the reboot years, all up to you.
I get the big mass of the time, really.
Okay, all right.
In this one. So obviously, as we've already spoken about the show coming back in 2015, but how excited were you to be bringing it back to a televised audience, to the masses that could see it, be either casual fans or become more regular fans through the show?
It is different being on TV. I mean, my enjoyment level of showing up to an event kind of doesn't change. I'm having a good time whether I'm being filmed or I'm not being filmed. And honestly, I think that's part of why it's worked so well for me, because this shit put a camera in my face and I just don't care. I'm still there having a good time at the event, right? But as far as fan engagement goes, because you simply just reach more people. And the fans are awesome. I mean, don't get me wrong. Those first 2 seasons, I was sort of cast as the villain, and so I got some interesting email and messages that weren't positive. Okay, but for the most part, those interactions have been fantastic, and it's certainly opened up a lot more opportunities for me to. I do a lot of like school displays and things like that where I'll take the robot, right? And if you have the opportunity to help kids and improve their lives and get them excited about science and engineering, I don't think you can, this is a really high calling. You should do these things. You should find a way to do them. And I get more of that now. And that part is cool. I mean, if you reach the point where you have any sort of influence in the world, you should use it for positive things. And it's one of the things that I really enjoy about this is I get the opportunity to get kids excited about this. And, I've been doing it long enough now. I've got some interesting stories from that where it's like, I go do a display. I don't remember it. I've done hundreds of displays. And years later, a kid will come to me and goes, hey, Mr. Billings, you remember me? And it's like, no, I'm sorry. I don't, right? And it's like, yeah, it's okay. I just wanted to let you know, I'm going to, engineering school in the fall, and it was all because you came to the school.
That means more like for me, and like I know a lot of people will think the same thing. That is rewarded itself for anything.
That's a paycheck. For me, that is more than money. That is I influence somebody's life positively
by smashing up things.
And by entertaining, by doing something I enjoy anyway.
Yeah.
So it's for any of you that have the opportunity to go do this, talk to kids, get them excited about engineering and building stuff, and we owe it to them to get them ready to do stuff going forward.
Yeah. I know, Steve, you were involved. Was it in a Vex team or something similar?
I was involved in a first robotics team at my high school, and I did that for 4 years. Eventually got to run it. I ended up just starting out. We started out in a little portable outside of our university, and then we eventually moved to a bigger room. Like it was like there's all kinds of things that like I attribute to having that experience when I was a kid, and then getting into combat robotics. Eventually hoping to get to more events soon. But in any case, yeah, go ahead.
I was to say, likewise with myself, loving Robot Wars when I was younger, absolutely adoring it, and then came back in 2016. I was older, then went into teaching, and am able to bring Robot Wars now to the kids there, just running the Hexbug Toys as a bit of a club and doing a bit of a league, but they adore it, they love it, and some of them will go off to do agriculture and mechanical engineering in agriculture and things, because we live in the middle of nowhere in the countryside, so it's wonderful. It's so worthwhile. It's one of the highlights of my week, certainly. I still attribute, and I've said it before, I still attribute WHYY PBS in Philadelphia for picking up Robot Wars and just deciding, oh, this is a cool show to show to kids, and actually picking that up and showing the first, I would think it was series 2 and 3 that they ran, and that was before it went to TNN, and we had the presented by China and all those other things that happened with Robot Wars over here. But I definitely attribute that to me getting involved and getting interested in the whole deal of engineering, and also my dad with working on his wheelchairs and working on his cars, and that there's all kinds of things that it's kind of built on itself like Lego bricks, in a case to just eventually lead me to where I am now. So there's definitely positive experiences through this entertainment, and what you see, so getting more kids involved is huge. And it was also huge for BattleBots to be on one of the big 4 networks over here, being on ABC. I think that was really important, even though it only lasted a couple seasons, to have that reach, to kind of dip its toe in the water again, kind of get into the media sphere again, to kind of get the networks to wake up and say, hey, this is something that could really have some pull and have some, positive influence, and really, pull in the dollar, because at the end of the day, that is what the networks are looking for. They're looking for something that's going to, kick back for them. Yeah. Talking back, the sort of field of competition back in 2015, it was quite a small field of competitors, turnaround time for when you were told it was coming back and you were wanted for the show, to when you actually had to have the robot there ready to fight. What did you make of the field that came along? Obviously, Tombstone would have been one of the higher rated machines, if you will, because of its pedigree on the live circuit throughout the years. But yeah, what did you make of that field of competitors that first showed up?
So the first season was invite only. So they basically went to people and said, hey, we're going to be doing the show. Would you like to build? You got to tell us yes right away, because we're going to film right away. That's kind of what they did to everybody. Right? And because BattleBots was on the air before, their first group of people were competitors that they had used way back in the day. And a lot of those guys hadn't built a robot since BattleBots had gone off the air. And they didn't reach out to that many current active builders. Okay. And I think some of that hurt them a little bit in that first season. I mean, there were some robots that were obviously put together very quickly, and guys that had skill, but they hadn't built a robot in a long time,
Sorry, Behemoth team.
And so, you had some that weren't super competitive in that first season. Luckily there were enough robots that were very top notch to put on a pretty good show, enough that we were able to at least get renewed and keep moving forward. It was a fun event to be part of, for sure, that first time around. I still wish I'd have won instead of coming in second.
That second place monkey is still very much on the back of Tombstone there. The thing is, a couple of minor changes on my part, and I'd have won that event. It was really that's where I was at. But
was it frustrating to not, especially given all those second places at RoboGames and everything else?
Yes. Yes, very
easiest
much
answer of the day.
Well, and I knew it was pretty much knew it was going to get renewed, pretty much knew we were going to keep going forward, and knew it was going to be a bigger field, more competitive every year moving forward, which has played out. That's exactly what it was. And I was thinking this was, I had my one shot at walking away with a giant nut, and I had messed it up. And I spent a year kicking myself in the ass over that one. It was bad. Yeah. You know.
Paul just broke your heart, and the only thing that could break his is a rolling dinosaur with laser eyes. That's the only thing that broke his heart.
Well, and the thing is, Paul and I have fought a lot over the years prior to coming back to BattleBots, and he's just a top-notch driver and builder. In order to do well, there's a whole bunch of pieces you got to have. You got to design well, you got to build well, you got to drive well, you got to repair well, you got to have your pits organized in such a way that you could do all of these things. People watch the show and they see that the driving is it, and it's an important piece, but it's a small piece compared to the big picture. And he runs a team. There's nobody better. There's other people that may be his equal, but there's nobody better as far as how he organizes the team, the pits, the preparedness. He does that. Nobody beats him in that. And you can look at his matches. You can say he gets lucky a lot. And he does get lucky a lot. But if you get lucky all the time, it's at that point, it's not luck anymore. He's prepared. Okay.
The next question, I can't remember where I heard you say it, but it fits in quite nicely with this. So bringing a 250-pound Tombstone, how did it feel to have one of the most instantly favored machines? What was your reaction when the public started to see the show, your work? And then the bit that I remember, I can't remember what interview it was from, but when you first saw the Tombstone toys in the shop, because that I think is when you really know that they're seeing it, they're doing.
I don't have mine. Mine melted.
I've got it melted.
Well, the battery inside the hex bug leaked out, and it had.
I've taken them all out of mine. They're all.
I'll find you a spare.
I need to get
here on the shelf.
Even the toy Tombstones have problems with batteries.
They're true to life.
When you reach a point where you get a toy, I mean, you got to do a bunch of things. I mean, you got to have been successful in the show. You have to do well. They're not going to give a toy to a robot that doesn't win too many matches. Well, Rusty, that's another.
Proud favorite.
Bring that thing in here.
You got to find some way to have that crowd engagement. You have to, and people just have to be interested. They have to want to buy it, right?
Yeah.
And so I knew that the toys were coming. So there's emails back and forth about design issues and logos and blah blah blah. And so I knew months before there was a toy on the shelf that the toys were coming. And so it shouldn't have been any surprise to me at all when I walk into a store and I see Tombstone on the shelf. I knew this was coming. There should be no surprise to that. And it was still an incredibly emotional moment for me to walk into the toy area and look and see my robot as a toy on the shelf. I mean, it was one of those things where, it was
still amazing to even see something like this. This is something you designed that I can buy. Yeah,
it was at Target. Next to the toy area, not too far, was a garden area. I went over there and picked up a lawn chair, brought it back over and sat down on the toys and just stared at it for a minute, right? Because it was an emotional moment for me. It really was.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is now I think there's been like 5 or 6 different versions of Tombstone in toys now. I've got more of them than anybody else does, and so
the new blue.
I still haven't gotten the one that came in between these two. I think there was a Tombstone, the gray bar one, and then because there was also a second Minotaur. I don't know. I can't keep track of all their revisions. Right. There's also a stronger version of Duck that got released. I don't know.
And I mean it's cool. Well, I remember walking in and buying one of the sets. Wasn't mine. It was because I've tried to buy all of them just to collect them.
Yeah.
So I go up to the counter with it, and I'm buying this BattleBots toy. And the lady goes, "Would you like a gift receipt?" And I go, "No, it's for me." And the lady looked at me like, "Okay, little boy." You know?
I love this idea of she just looking at you.
I got the bigger one at home. I just wanted this one.
Right, exactly.
That's so good. Oh, that's a great story.
How did you... Yeah. You spoke earlier about being pitched as the bad guy, and me and Sam have had weirdly a long-running tradition of interviewing people who have been pitched as a bad guy. We got to speak to the Mortis team a few years ago. That
Tornado
was great.
as well.
Tornado,
who definitely didn't cheat.
No, Jake Hewitt most recently, and a really nice moment of you handing over the mantle and almost cleansing yourself as the bad guy at that moment. You know, it's very much the spirit has passed over. But you spoke about some of the, I'll call them rotten emails that you may have got, but did you ever find it quite fun to play the villain, if you will? All
right, so TV in general thinks there needs to be this. There needs to be a bad guy, somebody to root against. And this guy, he can't just be a dick. He's got to actually be somebody who could show up and win the event.
That's the thing.
So it has to legitimately be a threat to do well, but you know, an anti-hero sort of thing. You need to have somebody there to it's part of their recipe for how they do television. Okay. And I make robots and they make TV. So I have to trust that they know what they're doing, that this is part of how you provide good entertainment. And it became obvious instantly when we were filming for season 1 that they needed this and that they had picked me to be that guy. And I think part of that is the fact that I do engage well on camera. Okay. That I have robot builders in general, you shove a camera right in their face and they immediately lock up and they don't talk. I mean, they're just not, they're great people, but when you stick a camera in their face, they don't open up as much. And like I said, I just don't care. Okay. You can tell me all you, I'm going to say what's on my mind. I'm going to do what I want. I don't care. And so it was obvious that I was the guy. And so they're going to, if they film anybody for a long enough period of time, they can edit you into anything they want you to be. Okay.
Yeah.
So the reality is it's best if you just don't fight it. Just give them what they're after. It's the easiest way to do this for everybody. Mm-hmm. So I just made the decision, you know, this is what they're after. This is what they need. I will help do this for the show. I will be that guy. What I found was that it was actually really easy for me to be the bad guy. I slipped into this role there wasn't any resistance whatsoever. And I don't know what that says about my personality. I didn't have any problem whatsoever and suddenly turned it into the bad guy.
Alter ego just found its way, just needed the right environment.
I guess, water. I mean, in general, I'm a really nice guy, and as
we said, humble, good-looking, successful.
We can
and charming, good-looking, humble, all of those things. But yeah, that's what they were after, and I gave it to them, and yeah, it was. I actually had a really good time with it.
Yeah. So you come away from 2015, runner-up. We've spoken already, you know. You must have been incredibly motivated to come back bigger, badder, ready to do the deed again. 2016. I imagine you come every year with that in mind. But 2016, you must have gone, right, this is it. This is the one.
I was a man on a mission. Absolutely. Okay. I had one goal, and that was to come home with the giant nut. That's what I was there for. And I'm sure that level of focus was part of how we did as well as we did, because it was just that's all. The only reason I was there was I was gonna come away with that giant nut, and that makes it sound like since then I've been less focused, and that's really not the case. The robots have gotten a lot better. It's just a lot harder to feel to do. But yeah, that second season I was a man on a mission, and we were able to pull it off.
Yeah, there was no more. Do you want some more? Were there? It was all very much okay. I've won the fight. Turn the damn thing off before it hurts it.
Yeah. At that point in time, it was very serious. So every piece of what we were doing was how does this action help us win the giant nut, as opposed to how does this action help the show be more entertaining.
I will say there's the fight against Beta in 2016. It's been all business, but that fight in particular for me, it was all business, but it was also a hell of an entertaining match at the same time, and you could
absolutely
see it. Yeah, it was just awesome. And
well, and you know, it was close enough that when they gave the decision, I didn't know which direction it was going. I mean, it was a very tough match, you know, and it was that was one of the better matches, I think, honestly, in the new era of BattleBots. Was certainly one of the better matches that we've had.
Yeah, so we'll roll on. BattleBots takes a year off, swaps network, and we're now with Discovery 2018. And the first main event of this new Fight Night tournament, Fight Night format, which was fantastic.
A genius idea. It's a genius idea. Like, you know, you can have whatever fight you want.
Yeah, and they choose two of the biggest spinners in the competition at the time, yourselves and Minotaur.
The grin on your face is a lot already.
Yeah.
Well,
were there any other particular moments of note alongside that? I mean, obviously for us, the shock of Bombshell, who came in with one mission as well to defeat Tombstone with that one setup that was perfect for you. It didn't matter how they did for the rest of the season. But were there any other matches for you in particular that you thought were sort of standouts for 2018?
You know, the Minotaur fight was certainly one of the heavier hitting fights, I think, that I've ever had. It damaged pieces of the frame in ways that I haven't had frames get damaged before. And in fact, the reason that we had problems through the entire rest of that tournament was only because of the damage from that fight. Because nowadays, it's pretty common to take 2, 3, 4 frames to an event. Those first few seasons, it wasn't. You showed up with a robot and then you fixed it as time went on.
Was it 18 or 16 that Bronco turned up with 2 robots? I can't remember. It was unheard of. Like,
unheard of. Oh my God, they're cheating! Look at these guys showing up with 2 robots. Everybody was bitching, and then after that, everybody else started doing it.
Yeah, we realized this is a TV show. We have to stay on schedule. Let's make sure we have. If you have the capital, you know,
for the longevity of the Fight Night format.
Yeah,
you know, and I think where some of the thoughts to that go is, like, I'll show up now. I've got 3 frames. I showed up at 3 frames. Those 3 frames are identical. They're just swapping out a part.
Yeah.
There's guys that show up with 2 or 3 different versions of the robot, and they got the same name and the same paint scheme, and they're totally different in, you know, and the way the robot is built and laid out. And I think that's where you start getting people as like, okay, this isn't the same anymore. Yeah. Okay.
You got that Ship of Theseus you know, explanation.
Exactly.
Like, how many parts of the robot have to be changed before you have a different robot?
Right. You know, and so that's where some of that negative connotation from this comes from. I don't know. It's to these days, the reality is you kind of have to show up with enough parts to be able to, especially with the Fight Night format. You're going to have 4 fights before you get to the tournament. They actually counts. I mean, you know, that's you're going to have a lot of damage along the way, so you got to be ready for that.
Is the worry that this has become more of a money sport then at that point? You know,
it absolutely has become more of a money sport. Certainly. Has it changed the flavor of the event when you're there? I would say that's absolutely as well. It's still a positive thing. It's not like it's a negative thing, but it's different than it was. It's you know,
it's not something that you've built in your garage and brought along to BattleBots. It's now, I have several iterations of this machine or several chassis, and I'm going to choose the fittest one to put into the fight, and then I'm going to spend a bit more money on it. Well,
that's how BattleBots markets it. It's this like ultimate championship, world championship. This is the best of the best that we can bring. you know, it's I guess there's
you have to show the best of the best at that point, then, don't you? Right. As the builders.
It's turned into less of a fun sport and more of a serious business, I guess, in that regard. And that doesn't. I'm not trying to say anything negative when I say that. The feel to it is different than it used to be. It's definitely more business at this stage.
I think it's one of the reasons why I quite like the Bounty Hunters or the BattleBots Champions formats, because it's the end of the season and nobody cares anymore, and it's, you know, just fun to go and smash up each other's bots again.
Yep, very much so. Well, and that's part of why I'm looking forward so much to going to RoboGames next year. It's back to
just
that.
Good to have RoboGames back.
Yeah,
it's great to have another option. It's also great to be in a spot where I can build a robot because I think it will be fun and I'm going to enjoy it, and not necessarily care if it wins.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, I'm going to build a new robot for RoboGames, and I'm telling you right now, I won't win the event. I'm taking a robot that will win some matches, but I'm building it because I want to build something that's going to be fun, and that's a different thought process. And I'm actually looking forward to it.
I think we're all excited to see what you come up with. There is actually a question about it later on, but we'll get to that a bit.
We'll get to it. Yeah. 2019. We're not even halfway through.
I know. There's still more BattleBots to go.
Yeah. 2019, and the field is slowly starting to creep up to the caliber that Tombstone has been running at for years previously. I think there's specific matches where, you know, Tombstone's number has been caught because of previous damage in fights, because of all sorts of factors, but certainly the rotator fight, the Bite Force match that sort of ended the run in the end, did you think that it would be that much of a challenge from 2018 to 2019, because there was such a step up in caliber of machine, and was it enjoyable, that level of challenge?
Well, the challenges are always enjoyable, so that part is cool. In both of those two losses, the rotator and Bite Force, those two matches easily could have gone differently. So there was some really unlucky breaks that happened for me in both of those matches, and that happens. You don't feel bad when that happens, because there's been a whole bunch of times when that lady luck has moved my way instead of the other way. So it's just how it is. In the rotator fight, when we ended up weapon to weapon, where he hit was right on the edge of the bolt hole where the tooth is mounted to the bar, and it created sort of a little stress area right there, and it split the tooth down the center. If we did that fight 100 times, I don't know that it would happen again. It was just one of those weird hits, and once the tooth is off and the weapon's out of balance, my robot, I don't need an opponent anymore. My robot will tear itself apart at that point in time. Okay. I
think this is the season where you even said the only thing that's going to break my robot is my robot.
Well, and in both fights that I lost, that is exactly what happened. The Bite Force fight was
weird.
Okay. So, you know, he's spinning up, I'm spinning horizontally. When the two weapons hit, his upward swing actually hit the end, not the cutting edge, the very end of the weapon. So, you know, a microsecond, it would have been different. And it wasn't the part he hit.
It was the other side wheel.
Sort of pressure wave through the robot, through the weapon bar. The other half of the weapon is what snapped off. So it wasn't where he hit. It was the other part that snapped off. And the part that snapped off went through my tire and gearbox on one side.
Yeah.
So it was in that one just weird hit, instantly I was dead. Okay.
There's a whole science lesson that can be had from that fight, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, the thing is, it's such a solid robot and he's such a good driver. If that hadn't happened and we'd ended up beating the snot out of each other for 3 minutes, he still might have beat me.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not like I'm saying, boy, if that didn't happen, I sure would have had Paul. That's not how that works. If those two robots fought 10 times, he's probably going to win 6 or 7 out of 10. It's just a solid robot, and he's a great driver. Honestly, the rotator fight, I think if we'd fought 10 times, it's going to be even. It might even go my way a bit on that, right?
Yeah.
Victor Soto, the master tactician, against Ray Billings, the punch your head off kind of robot guy.
Yeah, it's, I don't feel, like I said, luck sometimes goes against you, and you can't feel bad about that. I mean, I think it was a great season. We had a good time with it.
Absolutely. I mean, the other incredible match of note in 2019 for me was yourselves versus Gruff, which I think was a match we'd seen previously at RoboGames, potentially, or something similar. But in the battle box, it was a very different story, and just it was almost robot art, that fight, because it was just two bots smacking their faces into each other for 3 minutes.
The last time we had you on the podcast was when we discussed your BattleBots Bounty Hunters fight with Gruff as well. And like, I think what you said then was you were losing that fight right until you won it, which
is pretty much. Well, and the funny part about that first match against Gruff was, if it had gone another 25 seconds, my batteries would have been on fire in that match. So because when we pulled them out, they were the A123 cells in there, and several of them had popped. They were starting to vent. They were separating. They were. I actually ruined a bunch of batteries in that match, but I was 100% functional all the way to the end of the match, and he wasn't.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where me winning was the right call, but if it had gone any bit longer, it would have gone the other way.
It is interesting that it's one of those fights where people look back and go, "Oh, controversial, that one. Had I judged it like this, it would have gone the other way." Well, yeah, absolutely. But if you look at the judging rules of the year, then it's all Tombstone all the way. It just is that decision.
He was aggressive, and he had a lot of control, and so he was ahead in those categories, certainly. But at the end of the match, I had no damage, and he was crab walking because he didn't have drive on one side, and I took all of the forks were all twisted. The flame weapon system was all cut off. So I mean, the damage was completely to me at that point in time. So it was the right call. I mean, a lot of people complained about it, but I don't. That one. If it called the other way, I would have been upset. That was one I clearly felt I won.
Yeah. So we move into 2020, 2021. Obviously, there's a lot of disruptions along the way to Tombstone getting to the arena in 2020. Obviously, there's COVID, big part. There was, you spoke last time you were on the podcast about the accidents that happened. Tombstone makes it to the arena, which is wholly pleasing and so glad that it's there. The field between 2019 and 2020, if the field had increased quite a lot to 2019, by God, it jumped in 2020. Sure. There's just a whole new era of robot combat almost. What would you say? I don't know. What would you say was the biggest frustration of the season for 2020, especially?
Well, okay, so we started to try to be a little more prepared as far as the stuff we were taking to the event. So for 2020, we didn't actually do a lot more in the way of updates or changes to the robot. We're just trying to see if we can have more parts on hand, be more ready and whatnot. And our failure at that point in time was the fact that we were still basically trying to run the same robot. We were just trying to be more prepared in running the same robot, and the rest of the field was moving forward. Yeah. And so now, instead of 3 or 4 bots that could win and then a whole field of ones that couldn't, now we're 2/3 of the bots there with the right schedule could win the event. And that's going to be the norm going forward, is that most of the robots are going to be competitive enough. If they got the right opponents in the right order, they could win the whole thing. And that's going to be how it's going to be going forward. You're just going to have to be better than you used to be.
I remember having this conversation with Pete, where it's like we look at the bracket. We looked at it the past 2 years with him. We're very thankful that he's been able to give us a moment of his time. But it's like we've had those conversations where it's like any of these 32. It's amazing how competitive the field has got, that any of them with the right run could really go on and win the whole thing, no matter the seeding.
Right. Yeah, and he's not wrong. Okay, that's just what it is. So now, if every one of those matches is a coin toss, now it really is starting to come down to who just had to have the lucky run that particular time. And so, you get robots that make it to the round of 32 and they get knocked out immediately. And everybody's like, oh, look at that robot. It sucks. And it's like, no, I'm telling you right now, that was a really good robot. They just happened to not come away with the right result that particular time.
Well, we hear that everybody has a Tombstone setup now. And it must be somewhat flattering that they all have to prepare for your robot coming in. And I'm going to flip this question very slightly. Do you have an anti-Tombstone strategy for fighting the anti-Tombstone setups?
It's going like the fusion route, or not the fusion route. I'm thinking fusion. I'm thinking the Hydra route with the vert. Completely
it's like
paradigm.
Everyone
shift.
has a strategy for Tombstone. You then got the strategy to fight against that.
All right. So everybody does have an anti-Tombstone set. Everybody does. And in that regard, I've probably changed the face of the sport more than any other robot. Okay, because everybody you can't not have that plan. So everybody's got something. From my end, it's getting harder in that regard because it used to be everybody have some sort of big wedge that they'd put together, but as long as I could hit him the right way, I could still come out ahead in that particular match. People are doing more and more of the AR 500 for their wedge assemblies now. And so if my weapon is also AR 500, I don't have that hardness advantage when I hit, and I'll start to glance off and slip. So then I have to use harder weapons to be able to dig into the other guy to deliver the energy. So now we're moving up to the tool steels, and those work great until they don't, and then they fail spectacularly.
Yes.
Okay. And so at this stage, my next step is probably to try a couple of other different alloys. I need to find some way to be above the hardness of AR 500 with AR 500 toughness.
It's not as quickly
right now I don't have an answer. There's other stuff out there, but I don't have one that I'm going, yes, that's what I'm going to do. So like
adamantium,
I've got ideas right now. I'm not necessarily happy with any of them. There's a couple of other tool steels that might be an option. H13 set potential. There are some AR grades that are harder than AR 500. But now we're getting some weird expenses and whatnot to machine them and get them set up and whatnot. So I don't have an answer yet. I better come up with something in the year off.
You've got 12 months to work on.
Time starts now.
I've got a year, so I'll come up.
You're
with
like the pitchers that they have Tommy Johns, and like over that time, you better start using your brain, start thinking like, how am I going to come back? Am I going to come back with something different that people haven't seen? It's
this was going to lead on to my next question. 2021 must have been frustrating to have all the little
things. Like the word of the episode.
2021 Tombstone, whole new look to it. Looks fantastic. And everything in theory should work out. Didn't quite always go to plan. However,
I do want to do a big shout out to the Scorpius Builder blog as well, because obviously you discussed a lot of this on there. Like, there was so many changes and it was, as soon as you got in there, you're like, oh my God, what have I done?
Because this is the sort of thing you just can't test elsewhere properly, because you don't have the battle testing outside of the battle box, because it's just too dangerous. So, the first time you're testing that out is when you're in the box put against an opponent that's just a really rough matchup for your first one out. It's finicky to try and then go, okay, of all the things that we've changed in the robot, which bits was that didn't quite go well this fight?
So we did make a lot of changes. We did make a lot of changes for going into that season. And anytime you make a lot of changes wholesale all at once, you're likely to find things that didn't work the way you had in mind. And so the fact that we didn't do as well as I would like didn't necessarily surprise me. I mean, we made too many changes all at once. There's pieces of what we did that I was very happy with. Then there's other pieces that were clearly not up to snuff. And so we'll have stuff there that we'll have to address going forward. There are pieces that there's no way to find out until you're in the box. Okay. So I can clean up my area here and drive it around in the driveway as long as it's, nobody else around and I clean everything. I can even spin it up to make sure everything's working like it's supposed to, but none of that equates to battle. Okay. No. And that's where we found we had some issues that we're going to have to address. And we tried to deal with some of those things at the event, and it's just going to require some wholesale changes again to move forward.
Yeah.
So having the year off is probably going to help in that regard. I do have some cool ideas, time and money, like always. We'll see if I can figure out how to make.
Will Ray protect his wheels?
Yeah, no, probably not.
Can we just delete all of the questions from the listeners that have asked that?
There were 39.
Probably not. The problem there is the wheels need to be as far apart as the weapon is wide.
Yeah.
So if the wheels are narrower than the width of the weapon, if you think it drives crazy now, you should see it when I try to narrow that in. It doesn't stay, it bounces all over the place. It's horrible, right? So if they have to stick out there that far in order to make the robot drive correctly, it's really hard then to actually armor it because you got to go way out even further.
Yeah. We've learned that with Blade this year, where even if protecting your wheels, it can come back to bite you.
And it's hard to devote that kind of weight to armor out there because the only place I can take it from is in the weapon system. That's the only place it can come from.
And also you've got the ultimate come and have a go if you think you're quick enough of the wheels being right next to the weapon. And so, the ultimate armor, of course, is a good offense.
Like the big weapon out front is the best armor you're going to have. Yeah. And so one of the things we trying to do is we're trying to get it to drive a little faster, to turn and move a little quicker. And in the redesign of the frame, we ended up kind of changing some of the balance of the robot. It's a little more nose heavy than it used to be. And driving it in the driveway, it drove perfectly fine. But that's on concrete. You get it in the arena, and we were slipping and sliding. I didn't have enough downforce on the where the tires were, and so it didn't drive as well as it should. And
that's when something like magnets wouldn't help. Like with how high your frame is off the ground, you don't really hug the floor as tight as other robots.
It really wouldn't assist in that regard. So I basically need to just move some stuff around in there. One of the things I may end up doing going forward, like the frame is the length it is because of the longest weapon to make sure it clears as it spins through. We may just not run weapons quite that long. We may shorten the weapons so that the longest one is slightly shorter than the longest one I ran before. Because then I could shrink the nose of the robot, and that helps that weight balance quite a bit at that point in time. Because the
short blade has always done quite well, really, in combat. When you look at the short blade wins, it tends to be more wins than losses in the past.
The short blades do really well as far as the actual combat goes. There are some robots I need the length, absolutely, 100%. There's some that I need that long, lead to. And, we just talked about it, and I'm not sure I like this idea, but I could even show up with a couple of frames, one that's longer, one that's shorter, so I'd have the option of running the longer weapon on those certain matches.
Long tombstone, that's a thought.
Wheelbase.
Right, exactly. It's, I got a year to think on all those things. We'll see.
Yeah. I look forward to it. The last question I have then is, before I hand the podcast back to its owner, is... There have been so many amazing Tombstone fights in its years and last rites and everything. Is there one in particular that stands out to you as the best? And it's the big question that everybody hates because, you've been in the sport for so long that there's too many to think of. But is there one that sticks?
I've had a lot of really just amazing fights. Yeah. So the Minotaur fight comes to mind immediately. That was that was a great match. The Beta one was right there as well, because I could have gone either way. So those are two top ones. I was actually looking through some older fight footage that I have, and there's a fight between Last Rites and Original Sin where we were being filmed for the Killer Robot show for Science Channel. Yep. And so Grant Imahara was the presenter, the host of that particular show. And there's a match where somebody from the audience is filming this match. And it was as good a match as Gary and I have ever had. And Grant's in the corner of the arena, and they got cameras on him, and he's trying to like give play-by-play while there's parts being thrown at his head right behind him, right? And it is hilarious because he's trying to be engaging on camera, and then he's trying to watch the fight, and he's doing this back and forth the whole time. It's hilarious. It was one of the better fights. So that one's right there towards the top.
Yeah. He's truly a special human being.
Yeah. I was going to say as well, how cool I really love Grant. He was a good guy. How cool was it to fight Gary this year at BattleBots as well? Because, you know, after all those years of fighting him at RoboGames, to get him on TV as well must have been
on TV with me winning. Okay, because if you go throughout the years, I think he's won like 70% of the fights. He owns me. He's beat me more than I beat him. So yeah, I get him on TV and I beat him. So yeah, that actually felt really good. You know.
Well.
It is possible to outdrive Gary Jin as long as you cut 3 of his tires first.
Well,
there you go.
You just need to hamstring him that much, I suppose. So
and then somehow with one tire, it still kind of drives.
I know.
He can get anywhere in that arena he wants with one tire. He is one of the best drivers that's ever had a stick in his hand. Absolutely. He's
crazy. What a great rivalry as well between the pair of you. We have asked our listeners for questions. I've tried to limit it down because we did have quite a lot, but I've kind of pulled out some of the better ones. So we'll start off with friend of the podcast, Charlie Hubbard, who asks, do you want some more? And if so, what do you want more of?
Well, okay. I mean,
that's our Charlie.
Away from robots, I'd probably like some more cheeseburgers, and I might go have one later on for lunch. I don't know.
There you go.
It's a great little catchphrase, and you'll probably hear it again at some point in time.
I hope so. I absolutely heard it. The first one was when we heard it gets radioactive, and like Kane just turns to you, and he's just like so confused.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was a funny match. I mean, they knew they really were outclassed in that particular one, and it's like, okay, so I clobbered you, and you're kind of done. Just stop moving. Just don't do anything. We'll call it done, right? And so he's like trying to move that big plastic monstrosity around.
It's like, you've really got to question it. How do you build something as beautiful and awesome as Behemoth? And then at all of the other competitions that you go to, there's some weird and wacky designs out there. Radioactive and whatever that grabby thing was in ClashBots that didn't really work. Yeah.
Yeah, when they were at the time, it's like, if you keep moving, I got to keep hitting you. This is how this works.
There's no
right? So make sure this is really what you want before we go forward. So.
Do you have to pay royalties to the Mauler team for saying, "Do you want some more?" Because that wasn't the first instance of that, where it was season 1.0 where they fought Mauler, and you have Morgan just saying, "You want some more."
I don't remember that, but I believe it. That fits.
Oh yeah.
Steve, do you want to take the next one?
Sure. So we have Michael Wise. What is your favorite win-loss with Tombstone? Doesn't have to be a win. I could even say a loss. Would be more interesting.
Oh, okay. I can remember one of my matches against Doc. Okay, where I had it. I didn't know at the time there was a wire inside the robot where the wire is actually broken inside the insulation. Oh. So it's one of those things, you look at it, the wire's intact, but it wasn't. And so and that was the wire that went to power to the receiver. Okay. So, I mean, this is death, right? And so throughout the match, it hit him and whatnot. And then all of a sudden the robot would just stop. And it's like, well, I'm knocked out, right? Well, when you stop moving, then it's the robot stops wiggling. It would make enough connection that it'd take a few seconds. The radio would reboot and I could drive again. Right? It was frustrating as heck. And I'm glad that one went the whole distance and I won that match. So it's one I remember back. It's like at the time, I'm like, this is just, I'm going to lose this match and there's nothing wrong with the robot. And then, I made it all the way to the end and won that particular match. That one was pretty satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
Devin.
Yeah. Ty Daly, who has just christened you in a different chat we're in, Bill Dye the Kinetic Guy, which is a nice name. Does being branded as the King of Kinetic Energy mean something to you, or is it a burden? And everyone has a Tombstone plan, but what would yours be if you were fighting Tombstone?
Okay. All right. So the King of Kinetic Energy title is okay with me. I am perfectly all right with this. I am always going to try to show up with as much kinetic energy as possible. So it's fitting. I think if you look at what I've done over the years, this isn't something I did once really well. It's something I've done well for decades at this point. So I'm okay with wearing that crown. It's all right. As far as what I would do as an anti-Tombstone plan, probably very similar to what a lot of other people are doing. Just a big ass block of steel up front, and just the trick to beating Tombstone. A lot of people think the idea is I'm going to get around behind him, I'm going to get a wheel, I'm going to get the back of the robot and whatnot. That is the wrong way to beat Tombstone. The right way to beat Tombstone is to go at the weapon. Mm-hmm. And if you can do that and take what I'm dishing out, then you deserve to win.
The whoops approach. Along with many others.
I'll say that the mammoth approach was the one that surprised me. They didn't even put a wedge on it. They just thought, all right, let's just go for it, and it did really well.
Yeah.
Rob Weston asks, what is your favorite damaged part that you've been given after a match, and why?
Oh, part to me. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, I've got a lot of really good ones. I'm trying to think of a favorite. Not because it's a better part, but because of the circumstances around how I got it. It's probably the fist off of Tantrum.
I was going to say. I remember the quote, I want one of those fists. I'm taking it.
He said if I'd cut one off, I'd get to keep it. And it's like, okay, so that was my whole plan I didn't care if I lost.
No.
I didn't care if I lost. I just wanted to cut that fist off so I can keep that fist. And so it's out in the game room on the shelf between the giant nut and the giant bolt. It's sitting right there.
Did you get the one that ended up on the floor? Did you get the one that was pierced into the corner of the box?
Yeah.
Oh, so they managed to rescue that.
They all signed it, and it's sitting out there.
Amazing. Do you know what's funny? Yeah. Like I remember watching back the fight you had with Tantrum recently. Well, I say recently, over a year ago, but recently when we saw it on
recently
TV.
Aired, right? Yeah.
And was it the same fist that came off their Shremek this year? Like, because one of them came off again, or did they go in without it?
So the first season of Tantrum, they had those big, huge fists on the side, and they were just bolted in place. Right? The fists they've got on it now are on the end of like their self-righting arm, and they're like, little tiny baby hand fists compared to the ones that they did before. So yeah, they're still fists, but it's totally different.
It's not the same.
It's not a trophy.
Go on, Steve. Next one.
Okay, let's do it. Steve Dufort, brother in name. How can high energy horizontals survive when everyone has a hardened steel wedge these days? And this is also something that YouTube user Blue J FTW asks along the same line. Like how necessary is it to have like a ground game for horizontals like Rotator has and Malice has? I guess those kind of go together.
Kind of. Okay. So I don't envision, with the design I have now anyway, of Tombstone trying to have some sort of ground game too. I don't see that. And as I say that, I run through ideas in my head where I could make it work. I don't know. Right now, my thought process is no. I won't have forks or a wedge or anything on the back in case the weapon breaks. My focus needs to be more to make sure the weapon never breaks. That still needs to be my ultimate thing. How is it fighting all the horizontals and all the verticals with wedges and whatnot at this stage? Those are matches I can still win. I just need to find a way to fix some of the dependability issues. And because the reality is, it's at that point, it's just going to come down to who survives to the end. And there's a mechanical advantage to verts in that regard, because when I hit something, that equal and opposite thing is all coming back to me as I spin away. When they hit something, that equal and opposite, it's putting a whole bunch of that energy into the floor and the earth below it. And so there's just an advantage to verticals in that exchange. And the only way for me to come out ahead in that is to have more energy than they can have and deliver it reliably. And it is, you can have more energy in a horizontal than you can in a vertical. When they start trying to have equal energy in a vert and they try to turn, they can't. The robot works
in Deep Six, do its thing, right?
You get some weird gyroscopic dances. Whereas if I'm spinning horizontally, I'm turning in the same plane I'm spinning. So it doesn't matter how much energy I have there, I can still drive the robot correctly.
Yeah. So
I need to take advantage of that. I need to just have more energy and deliver it reliably. It's just easier said than done.
Yeah, that's like the ultimate goal. Once you figure that out, you're gonna be really. I mean, what's gonna beat you at that point? You would think,
Right.
YouTube user Grant Catdun asks, have you considered an asymmetric blade for Tombstone? And what do you make of the newer horizontals in the field, such as Orbi, Valkyrie, and the much secretive Triton? There's a video that I've seen of, I think it was either Tombstone or Last Rite spinning up, where it looks like you're bending space-time. And the whole bar is doing this sort of thing. But honestly thought it was an asymmetric bar on it to start with, because the way it's spinning, it looks like one end is larger than the other. Right. It's not. It's just the camera, I suppose. But what do you think of the sort of asymmetrics? And then what do you think of some of the other horizontals?
All right. So an asymmetric weapon design is needed if the tip speed is so high that you can't get engagement. So this is really common with verticals, because they're typically spinning a much shorter distance, and so they're getting back the energy by just spinning it faster. Right? And so the purpose to that is to make sure you get enough engagement. So you want to be able to deliver a hit rather than just sort of grind away at whatever you're hitting. So there's a valid reason for building an asymmetric bar. That doesn't apply to my robot. Okay, I don't need more engagement. I really don't. I have strikes on the weapon bar that's 6 inches in from the end. I get plenty of engagement. There's no benefit to doing an asymmetric bar
style
in my
points,
design.
Maybe.
No.
Like a scythe,
there is something to be said for that. Certainly, you can make them look cooler in doing that. You can design some weird designs and whatnot, but from an energy delivery standpoint, there's no advantage to it. And in fact, for a given weight, an asymmetric bar has a lower moment of inertia and will deliver less energy. So you have two of them that are the same weight, spun at the same RPM. The full length bar will have a higher moment of inertia and deliver more energy when it hits. So there really isn't any, in my design, there isn't a purpose for it.
As far as things like Orbi, Triton, Valkyrie, what do you make of those sorts of designs? Obviously, that's 3 very different designs and things. Orbi, all season long, they were pitching it as
the Tombstone.
Yeah.
And I love to see all of them. They're all fantastic robots and whatnot. They all have certainly their advantages. If they continue development on all of them, they'll continue to do very well with them. They're all matches I love to watch when they fight. Each of them is different in its own unique way from what Tombstone is, but they're all similar also. So I'm happy that they're there, and I mean, each of those teams are people that I like personally really well. So it's one of those things where when they're fighting, I'm always cheering for them to win just because they're good friends of mine,
Yeah.
Nathaniel Hayden asks, if you didn't enter a horizontal into BattleBots, what type of robot would you like to enter? And along those lines, YouTube user Zorio Avatar asks, do you plan to bring Tombstone back for the following season, or would you consider doing something different?
Second one first. So clearly Tombstone is my mark on the world. Okay, it's my flag bearer here. So I expect that Tombstone will continue to be involved in BattleBots as long as they manage to stay on the air. If they continue with the Golden Bolt tournament setup like they did this last season and going forward, if I ever get bored of running Tombstone through the regular season, I could just take it for just the Golden Bolt part and build something else. I could do that. So Tombstone is eternal. You
can't kill it. You can't outrun the Reaper.
All right.
You're locked in.
As far as building other robots goes, every design anybody's ever shown up with, I've thought at one time or another, hey, I could build that, I could do that, and things I could build differently. So what of those would I actually build? That's a really good question. And I don't know. I honestly, as weird as it sounds, I've got a really good idea for a hammer that I could do. That would be different than everybody else's take on a hammer. So that's one that, just because I think it would be fun and frustrating to build, that may happen at some point in time, just to test my engineering skills.
I was going to say that's potential of RoboGames coming back and things like Norwalk Havoc. You have the field to test out that sort of thing.
Oh, exactly. Because like I said, I've got something new I'm going to take to RoboGames.
That's a really good segue.
And it's me exploring ideas that I want to play with, and I don't care if it wins any matches. Mm-hmm. And you can't show up to BattleBots with something with that mindset. You can't show up with something where I'm going to build something that's fun for me to build and show up and have a good time. We're not at that stage anymore. You have to show up with something that's you have to be serious to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, and it that makes it sound like RoboGames isn't as serious of a competition. And I'm telling you right now, when it gets to the finals, it's every bit as serious as any event you've ever been to. But I have the option of building something just because I'm going to enjoy building it and taking it there. And I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, RoboGames was there as kind of like that and Combots and Kilobots. I think even that's still going on. These are the events that kind of filled the void for when BattleBots kind of disappeared, and kind of it was still sort of around, but not really. The rumblings were there, but it was nice to these are the events that were there that kind of kept things going forward.
Right.
And with like the RFL, like everyone had it was always still around. Like the heartbeat was still there, and it was nice. It's nice to see it coming back. Speaking of RoboGames, YouTube user Living Murphy's Law. You've already hinted at it. Would you think about bringing something like a Tombstone to RoboGames, or something completely different? Like, have you made that decision yet?
Okay, so I have decided for the heavyweight category to not bring back a horizontal to RoboGames. Okay. I've done that. I've been there. I want to do something different. Okay. Mm-hmm. I want to put my development time into something else. So for the middleweight, we talked about Mortician. Mm-hmm. That will be, assuming I get better and I get everything done.
Fingers crossed. Not pun intended.
yeah, it's crossed.
Bad choice of words.
Yeah,
I caught myself. Trust me.
He's never coming back again.
Mortician will be a serious. That'll be a serious build. That will be me showing up with a robot that's going to try to win. Mm. For the heavyweight category, I got something different. I don't know if I want to talk about it. I got something different.
Well, okay. I will say, does it have to involve a question that Keith on Discord asked, that there's a little disc appearing in the back of the Scorpio's Builder blog. Is there any weight to something like that?
No, or is that just comment whatsoever.
All right, you keep your secrets.
Jevon, I think you've got the best question for us.
I do. I have the most important question of the whole podcast. It's the last question. You'll be so pleased to hear. YouTube user, just another certified idiot, asks the big question: does pineapple belong on pizza?
Wow. Okay.
Asking the hard cutting questions here.
I happen to be one of those weirdos who will in fact eat pineapple on pizza. So yeah.
Sorry, I destroyed my microphone in the process. Yes.
And so for those that may be disappointed in that, I'm sorry, but yes, I will in fact eat pineapple on pizza. I usually won't order it that way, so it's not like I'm going to go purposely order one. But if it's on there, I'll eat it with no problem.
Free food is free food, right?
yeah. You see me in profile, you can tell I enjoy food. So,
Oh, that's such a shame. Honestly, Ray, this has been a delight, and thank you for giving us so much of your time, and I know I speak again for the rest of the community, but we can't wait to have you back and hopefully fighting fit with Tombstone again. And just BattleBots won't be the same without you competing, I don't think. And I'm glad that you're going along, but
I imagine they'll roll you out for the audience meet and greet almost every show if they can.
And I told him, I said, look, I'll come if you want me for anything on camera, I'll do that. Off camera, I'll meet the crowd if that's what you want. If you don't want me for any of that stuff, I'd still like to come and hang out with everybody.
Surely there's going to be a shot of you looking sad and walking away from the camera at some point because you're not competing this year. They love to do it. They love it.
Probably. Yeah. It's. You guys are stuck with me in one way or another. I'll be around.
Totally fine with that.
Wouldn't have it any other way. But thank you for
you like fanatics.
Well, these two, I won't.
Right, it's us. It's us. Yeah. The thing.
Honestly, thank you so much for your time, and I hope everyone enjoyed learning a little bit of history from yourself. It's quite the career that you've had in terms of fighting robots, which long may it continue.
Yeah, sounds good. I always enjoy talking about robots. It's more harder to get me to shut up. So this
Please never do. I think it's great to hear from you. Anyway, with all that said, I have been Sam Elliott 64.
I've been Steve the American Killjoy.
I have been World of Woodrow.
And hey, I'm Ray Billings, builder of Tombstone.
And the three of you will see you all in the future. I don't know when, because
I imagine it will be.
We have literally nothing else planned.
I know. I was going to say, because BattleBots is just round the corner. It's literally a few weeks away now. So,
hey, who knows? We might even do something live without you, Sam.
Wow, unbelievable mutiny. Well, with all that said, thank you very much for listening, for watching, and we'll see you for more podcasty goodness in the future.